Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at Jekyll and Hyde context. So what is context? Context is the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. So context is anything that was happening around the time that your piece of text was written and things to do with the author's life. So when I think of context, I like to split it into two parts. So there's biographical context and historical context. So biographical context is the writer's beliefs, education, culture, any experiences that shine through their work. And it's really important to know about their background and the biographical context because it helps us as a reader to understand and interpret a text. Because what the writer or the poet might have gone through really could be a part of their work, okay? So historical context is the events and ideas that help shape his or her writing. So when a reader is familiar with these events and ideas, this is what helps the text be better to understand, basically. Historical context, anything that happened around the time that the piece of text was written. And it could be, for example, if you were looking at a poem from the conflict cluster, and you might be looking at World War I, for example. So anything that happened around that time is historical context. So let's start off with historical context. Victorian London, which is around the time that the novel was set, working class London was very overcrowded. Middle and upper class lived in amazing houses like Jekyll's. We know that the Industrial Revolution meant that many working class people had to migrate to large towns and cities to live and work. Housing had to be built quickly to accommodate workers and their families. There was a lot of slum houses of poor quality because it was built so quickly. So many houses were built really quickly, and the reason why is because loads of people were moving to London. Whole families lived in 1 or 2 bedrooms, and the houses were normally damp with no running water, which led to loads of diseases such as cholera. So we're going to look at the working class during Victorian London. So the working class men and women were not really respected during this time. There were some parts of London where the most respectable men wouldn't want to be seen. So the middle class, upper class men wouldn't want to be seen in certain parts of London because these parts of London were seen as quite degradable. They also didn't want to be seen at brothels or public houses. Hyde is associated with these less respectable parts of the city. His house was in Soho, okay? And we know that Hyde has this strange side to him. Oh, I don't want to ruin the book if you haven't read it yet. But it kind of shows what type of person he is. And knowing that Jekyll, the other side to Hyde, has this is quite respected, but then he has this evil, dark desire in him to commit, bad things, which he uses Hyde as the person to commit these things. So let's start to think about biographical context. So the author, Robert Louis Stevenson, was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1850. His family included engineers, scientists, a professor of philosophy and a religious minister. We can see the scientific and religious sides of Stevenson's family reflected in both his life and in the novel Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Stevenson was quite sick when he was young. He had serious lung problems. A combination of his love of adventure and ill health led him to spend many years as a writer, travelling the world in search of a climate that was healthier than Britain's. And because he was spent quite a bit of his time in hospital, he did do a lot of writing from a hospital bed. As a child, he was influenced by the strict Christian beliefs of his nanny, Alison Cunningham. As an adult, Stevenson was interested in the behaviour of Victorian gentlemen, the way they maintained an outwardly respectable appearance, but secretly they indulged in immoral behaviour. So he really found this interesting, and he was interested in it and wanted to pursue that part of his writing. Another important thing to remember is that it was published in 1886. It's important to know that because when you're writing, for example, your introduction of your essay or assessment, it's always remember to know when Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was written. So the theory of evolution. In 1859, when Stevenson was 9 years old, Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species. This book became famous for introducing the theory of evolution to the public. This was really important because many people saw it as an attack on religion, because the book made it impossible to believe that God created the world in 7 days. Darwin put forward the theory that all life had evolved from more primitive forms. It's interesting that this book came out at this time, because one could say it did have an attack on religion. It does kind of make one think about whether religion was true around this time. And because people were so religious, it did feel like a real attack. Victorian gentlemen had to try as hard as they could to hide their darker side. In Victorian middle and upper class society, it was important to look respectable. As a result, people hid their true feelings, especially if they were immoral and improper. And one thing that was very important was reputation to Victorian gentlemen. They didn't want their good name to be ruined by bad things that they'd done, whether it was going to a brothel or anything that would make them seem as though they were less respectable. And because they wanted to keep their good name, even if they did have these desires, they had to do these things in secret. People kept sinful behaviour and less respectable desires secret. They didn't like to talk about anything that might damage their reputation or upset their civilized society. And to end, Victorian religion and science, because this is obviously very important, because we know Dr. Jekyll's science experiment involves Hyde. So Victorian society, as I said, was very religious. Christianity had a strong influence on many areas of everyday life in Victorian London. Darwin's theory of evolution was controversial. Christianity taught that God created every species, whereas scientists argue that species evolved gradually over time. And how this fits into Jekyll and Hyde. So we know that a theme is a key idea that runs through a text. It's reoccurring. The key themes in Dr. Jekyll and Hyde are scientific development, duality of mankind, and the supernatural versus nature debate. In Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Stevenson shows the fear of scientific development through Dr. Jekyll's scientific experience, how the experiment goes badly wrong, and how Dr. Lanyon fears the experiment. So it's really important that you include context, that you know things about the novel. So this video was just a quick part 1 guide to understanding the context behind Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now you have an understanding, or a better understanding of Stevenson's life and what was happening around the time that he wrote the novel. I will be uploading part 2 shortly. I hope you enjoy. Take care. Bye.